Hello, and welcome to JavaScript Marathon Training. We are so excited to be back again this month after our inaugural training sessions back in April. My name is Tara Hampton, and I will be your host today. In our web performance track today, we'll be covering the new metrics and tools available with the latest release of Lighthouse. Joining us is none other than the infamous Justin Rivero.
Indeed, infamous indeed. Oh, yes.
Senior VP of Web Platform and Engineering here at This.Labs. Justin, so glad to have you back with us again this month.
Tara, it's so good to be back. I felt like the month off really gave me time to reflect on the nature of performance on the web today. That and, I had a lot more coffee.
Oh, good. Coffee, yes, indeed.
Yes. I don't think we can have enough coffee in our lives at this point.
Ditto. Well, if you have any questions or comments after today's session, feel free to reach out to Justin directly on Twitter. His handle is at the bottom of your screen. Please don't be shy. He loves to talk.
I do love to chat. Come chat it up. Let's talk about things.
And of course, we couldn't do any of this without our sponsors. Our first sponsor today is This.Labs, your partners in modern digital transformation. We specialize in mentorship, consulting, training, and staff augmentation for enterprise organizations. You can find out more at this.labs.com or send us an email at hi@this.co. Do you find keeping up with the constantly evolving technologies a struggle? Do you want to bring your team up to speed on one of the latest technologies? This.Labs offers personalized training programs to suit your organizational needs, ensuring you and your team stay on the leading edge. Contact us today at hi@this.co to set up your complimentary needs assessment. And then, of course, our secondary sponsor is always coffee.
It makes the world go round, or at least our world, because, well, we do a lot of stuff, Tara.
Yes. And like he said, we do a lot of stuff. If you're familiar with this dot, you may already know that we put on weekly meetups online, covering various frameworks and topics each week. For the latest schedule and links to join, go to this.co. This.'s online meetups are an amazing opportunity for developers and enthusiasts alike to engage with the global tech community, no matter where you are in the world. That said, Justin, are you ready to give us some updates?
Always ready to talk about web performance. You know I love to do it, Tara. Like it just is. Yes. It's a magical time.
Yes.
Amongst performance things, because hey, we got a new release of stuff. So hey, let's dive into this. Let's chit chat about performance. So last week, which really should say last month, if you've followed our previous series of web performance things, I have some general things that I always like to keep in mind when we're talking about performance. I call them general rules, but realistically, there are no rules. Really, we really just want to make sure that we're operating with users in mind. So one thing to keep in mind is that perf is relative. What's fast for you or person A may not be fast for me or person B. Just because you're running your site and or other tooling on the latest and greatest hardware of things. I heard the new iPhone will also cook you dinner. Realistically, that's not what everybody has. And so it is a relative experience. You have to keep that in mind. You need some of those real user metrics, which we're going to talk about a little bit about today. Number 2, perf is about perception. And as you can see, over time through these episodes, my hair has continuously grown. Or is that just your perception? No, really, it's grown. I haven't been to a barber in quite some time because of the pandemic. I hope you're all staying safe out there. So just because something load time-wise seems fast or right doesn't necessarily mean that is the perception of speed you get. 10 seconds is not necessarily equal to 10 seconds in perceivable time of all things. So you have to keep these things in mind. We have to try to get there as quick as we can and understand how those things sort of shift around on our page, which we're also going to talk about today. Ooh, new things. And number 3 is possibly my favorite one, which is perf is all a lot about reduction. Less JavaScript, less network resources, less main thread time. Basically, just less everything. I like to think of it as if I wanted to take something that was really quite nice and just continuously reduce it into the tiniest amount of little packaged thing that I can have. That's what we want to do when it comes to perf. What can we ship down the wire that performs really well for our end user and things? So these are 3 rules I like to keep in mind as we sort of look at performance metrics and how we test things and all the things that sort of go together and stuff. And the fun thing about it is that we have a new version of Lighthouse, of which, as many people are well aware, huge fan. Lighthouse. And obviously I use it every day in its various forms, from its tooling to its node packages to various things I do with it. So, I've pushed things in there from time to time. And realistically, Lighthouse 6, like many of the lighthouses before it, is trying to prevent you from crashing into rocks. Because realistically, let's hope your web performance is not terrible. But alas, the only way to know is to measure, because we always want to be measuring. But before we get into the new features of things, I do want to touch on something that has fundamentally changed in Lighthouse, and it is the notion of new guidance, what is best known as Web Vitals. So if you have not heard of Web Vitals, you can take a look at it on web.dev. And if you're around next week, there's a small conference of things online, which will dive more into Web Vitals that the Chrome folks and many in the web community are putting together. And realistically, it's this initiative that says, we've always had a lot of numbers around. We know some of what these numbers mean to us as developers, because we look at numbers to tell us, hey, this is fast or this is slow, and and sometimes we equate that to that is good or that is bad. But realistically, the Web Vitals initiative is about really quality signals that are key to delivering a really good user experience on the web that is really focused around the very nature of users. It is a user-centric outcome. We want user things. We want numbers that represent what users are experiencing in a much better way. And number one, there are some goals around Web Vitals when we start to talk about them. One, it's an evolving set of them. So initially in 2020, they've sort of identified 3, of which we'll talk about those 3 in the context of Lighthouse here in a sec. But realistically, the goal is to evolve them over time as we get better telemetry and instrumentation. Ideally, we will have a better notion of what users are experiencing and how we can provide a better user experience through the performance APIs and tooling that we have. As I mentioned, they are focused on user-centered outcomes. We really want to talk about the nature of, what these things mean to an end user. It's just not a number stuck in time that magically is, looks good on a report somewhere. Like, if we see this thing, we want to equate it to what the user is actually experiencing. Sometimes it's about feelings. Feelings are more than just perceptions. So we want to talk about those feelings very deeply. And we want to be user-centric, of which I have sort of talked about continuously, I think for the last 2 months, to many people, including on this stream. Number 3, they can be measured live. Or as I like to call it, I liked my measurements hot out, straight out of prod. Because you know what? There's nothing like real user measurement. And ideally, we want stuff that is fundamentally in the field. Synthetic runs and tests are great when you want to get a pulse that you have on your desktop as you're developing things. But when we talk about web performance, we want to know what users are actually using. We want to know what users are actually doing. And we've had trouble with this in the past, like first meaningful paint, for instance. That can be tricky. Like what the browser considers a first meaningful paint against the heuristic is not necessarily what you may consider a first meaningful paint against what you're trying to deliver to a user. And as such, is that number really keen to fundamentally what painted, what was composited and shown to an end user? And that has been troublesome in a lot of the numbers that we've pulled over time. And you can see this in a lot of wiggle if you've done a lot of collection of that kind of data where you're like, okay, the number's pretty good. It kind of gives me an idea. But man, I really wish I could measure this a little bit deeper. And we've gotten a lot more APIs on the platform now that have changed names over the course of, sort of them being developed, that have come down into a core set of these three things. Apparently, I've gone magically backwards in time. Come back. There we go. Yay. So 2020, the three. So the three identified this year in 2020 that are pretty useful, as we'll see here in a sec, is largest contentful paint, first input delay, and cumulative layout shift. And largest contentful paint is somewhat like first meaningful paint, but realistically, it's looking for those things that are very large within the scope of, I want to paint this thing. And ideally, LCP is all about measuring how your site is actually loading stuff. So an example of this might be, let's say you've got a header, you've got a big body block in there. Maybe the header takes a tiny amount of stuff. You've painted it, yay. But is that useful to the user? Like, if the body of your content there? And realistically, we're looking for somewhere in the range of 2.5 to 3-ish seconds. And then anything beyond 4 is a fairly poor user experience, right? That's a slow user experience. Along those lines is first input delay. So I've talked about first input delay before. The notion of interactivity has always been a tough one. So if you were familiar with previous numbers for this, such as TTI, time to interactive, first input delay is a little bit better at this. And we've got some polyfill shim stuff that we can add to things that will give us better numbers against this. And we have new APIs for this. So this is going to measure our interactivity. And then lastly, but also new and amazing, cumulative layout shift. I really dig the name, cumulative. I feel like that word just is everything that is web performance. It's a cumulative effect of things. What was the cumulative nature of that thing? Cumulative layout shift. So this is one that you have all experienced. I know you have, because you're denizens of the internet. If you're, it's like watching my children abandon your sites out there for people who are developing terrible sites who have this problem. Cumulative layout shift is the very notion of stability in terms of the visual container of things. So let us pretend for a second you're scrolling around, you're reading an article on your news site of choice, and all of a sudden you get that pop, things move around. Oh, it's terrible. And when you're loading and getting that loading experience, it's even worse, right? Where you have these huge blocks shifting around as things come into view because maybe they async to load something and whatnot. And fundamentally, this is not a particularly good user experience. We've all experienced it as you go to try to click on the thing that then moves again as you try to click on it, at which point you throw your laptop out the window and buy a new one because apparently it was your laptop's fault all along. So cumulative layout shift is the last of them, and it's going to measure that stability, and it's going to give us basically this decimal log against saying, hey, we've had a lot of shift against this. So what we're looking for is very little shift. Like 0.1 is the current core vital that we're looking against right now. So you'll see, besides seeing these things in Lighthouse, you're going to see these in a couple different places. You're going to see them in things like the Crux user report. They're in the Search Console now as part of the Core Vitals report. And there's actually a library now, too, if you want to play with this straight away in terms of grabbing and sending these things, called Web-Vitals, which we'll put a link to in the show notes description somewhere down there. I don't know where my camera is. So lots of ways to collect these things. We've got a lot of good things in here, but there are some differences of which we're going to talk about, because let's open up a Lighthouse report from Lighthouse 6. Let's see. Stop this screen share. Ooh, I'm so big on the screen now. Hello, people. We're going to share a recent run. if I can find the window. There's a run. Huzzah, run. So, I can't actually see this window because it's... Apparently I'm trying to resize things that don't want to be resized. Haha, that doesn't work. That doesn't work. There we go. Let's put it back over here. It's Wednesday. I can make the windows work, I promise. All right, Lighthouse. Lighthouse version 6. So similar numbers. You see things, you see badges. In this case, I have tested our current victim, which has been a current victim on the show, which is my own site. Because if you can't, judge yourself for your own bad programming, how can you judge anybody else's, really? Like, let's call a spade a spade. So this is Lighthouse 6 report. It looks a little different, but the key here is really we want to dive into the notion of what some of these things are. So immediately you'll note that some of the things that we are used to seeing, things like first meaningful paint and whatnot, are not there any longer. So some of these things have been deprecated out as just not as important to the overall real user experience that people are experiencing. And you'll see that we still have things like FCP when we do get something first painted there, but we do have things like largest contentful paint. Oh, 3.2 seconds is terrible. I'm doing a terrible job. But you'll also note we've got cumulative layout shift here, which in this case is 0 for this run. But you'll note that FID is not on here. First input delay is actually not on here. And instead we have a replacement for this called total blocking time. And total blocking time is basically the measure of the amount of time between the FCP, the first contentful paint, and the time to interactive for basically the main thread. So you're trying to gauge basically if there are any long tasks in between those things that are going to block you out. And the reason for this is that we have these sort of numbers between the long task API and some other stuff that allows us to calculate this, while we still have to kind of polyfill shim FID. So TBT is the thing you're going to look at to tell you how much interactivity you're going to be able to get as those things sort of run. So really you can think about how much is my main thread blocked up by all that code I probably shouldn't be shipping in the first place. So this is going to be a structural change to, if you've sort of lived on the other stack of numbers, these things are going to be somewhat shocking possibly for you. And similarly speaking, if you live and die on like the total performance numbers, you should be quite aware that the overall underlying formula for the performance numbers and calculating these things have actually changed. So an example of this is that things like speed index, speed index used to account for quite a bit more, as I recall. I think it was anywhere from 25 or 27%, something like that. Speed index now only accounts for like 15%. Largest contentful paint now accounts for almost a quarter of your score. Layout shift now has a little bit, 5 or 6% in there, thereabouts. Total blocking time is going to be 25% of your score. So if you're expecting, if you see a huge shift in your score as you've moved to Lighthouse 6, this is not unknown. So there is an article about this, both in the change log as well as in the, actually I think in the what's new post too, about the score shift. They actually produced a little calculator. Do I have the calculator somewhere? Somewhere. Yeah, let me see. Let's open it. Can I open this link in here? Let's find out. Aha! Yeah, I can. Boop, calculator. So if you want to see exactly how these things sort of relate against the scoring, you can use exactly how these values affect the overall score as you start to like go, well, if I improve my first contentful or my largest contentful, like, what is this going to do for my overall score? It's a nifty little calculator. And overall, it's going to, help inform your decisions about, where you want to focus. But again, I would strongly stress that you should be focusing on the user side of life, of things. Somebody asked a question: how's Lighthouse's results affect SEO? So Lighthouse doesn't necessarily directly affect SEO, but if you read the Google Webmaster blog, there is, as well as the Google Webmaster guidelines, there is quite a few notes now that mobile performance in particular will affect your SEO and your rank. I won't get into the firmness of all those things at the moment, but Lighthouse informs many of those things. So the notion of, again, the notion of getting content to the users is your site particularly quick. And again, for a lot of this stuff, when against my general rules, we're talking about things like, well, how do these things equate to perception? That's what cumulative layout shift is, right? You're showing the user something stable so that they don't have to guess and jump around. You're rendering stuff quickly by looking at large contentful paints, right? You're looking to get stuff to an end user. These things are going to affect your overall speed profile, and it's fundamentally going to affect your SEO. So you're going to want to check the Webmaster guidelines for that, which is, the Google Search Console now. You can check some of those in there. Some of the stuff now surfaces as well within that console, so definitely give that a look if you haven't. If we scroll down further into things, you'll see a lot of additional sort of stuff in here. A lot of this stuff looks very familiar if you're familiar with previous versions of Lighthouse. There are some additional ARIA runs in here as well. Lighthouse still uses Axe Core. So if you've used Axe, kudos, you should be using Axe. Put it in your tooling, check this stuff out. Run it through Lighthouse as well. But they've also added additional audits for that. So you'll see things like hidden body and hidden focus in particular. So like this little thing right here. So that you're not trying to hide stuff that's not, you're not trying to do any particularly circumvent tricky things that you probably should not be doing to begin with. That is also just a bad overall user experience. Because users come with things that they're going to need to be able to do, and do not block your users from doing stuff. So accessibility audits have been extended. We've got further action in there. On the PWA side, maskable is now in here as well. So it'll check to make sure you've got a maskable set and make sure it's correct. So in this case, this one right here. So we did get some of those new audits, but beyond that, the big thing is, if you're really focused on the perf portion of this and not necessarily the secondary audits that you might be looking at, which while they're important, you should definitely look at them. If you're focused on this, the key is to keep in mind is that a lot of that scoring, they tested heavily. So if you're going, oh no, this is terrible, all these scores must be wrong, the entire internet is affected of things, there was a lot of analysis done on that. So some of it was just bug fixes, some of it was, again, pure weight changes. And again, some of this is because of the variability of it. So a good example of this is TTI was always really quite variable based on what exactly you were trying to do. And again, same thing with things like FCP. Like, you've rendered some pixels, but are they the largest amount of pixels on the screen, right? You don't want those things. And that's why FMP does not exist in here anymore, is that overall, when you look at the analysis, that FMP starts to become significantly too variant to figure out. And so now you have better metrics against this. So in terms of the base set of location stuff, you've got a good set of core metrics here, and you should focus on those first. If you're looking for, if don't freak out, like, don't freak out about the numbers, is the first thing I'll say. Focus on the way that your mobile mindset works against this stuff, because again, we're looking at this from a mobile first mindset, and again, this affects mostly how the web is used today. Lots of mobile use, lots of constrained device use. Similarly, people have a tendency to want to run this against non-mobile profiles, and I would say even with Lighthouse 6, which now uses a Moto G4 sort of profile of stuff, which is going to change your base screen size. It'll change the device identifier too, if you were using that for any particular type of test, just as an FYI. And realistically, this is because that's kind of what we all use. So if you're into performance testing and you've used things like WPT or web page test and other things, or you're like me and have G4s lying around in a rack, this is why. And it's also now, as of 81 or 82, in the mobile list. So you can use the G4, test against that size. It'll give you the same sort of experience as you sort of wander through the wonders that are Lighthouse and Lighthouse 6. And again, most of the stuff is available now as part of CLI. So if you want to run 6 right now, you're gonna have to pull the CLI. It is coming in as part of the next revision in DevTools. As you can see, boop. It also got renamed recently, and navigate to a different page because no file checks, people. So you'll be able to run this in there. This is also rolling out across a wide range of other stuff. So things like the Page Speed Insights API, which some people use as part of their overall tooling and things, are also getting updates. So the big thing at the end of the day is that we're continuing to progress as we start to look at these things when it comes to performance in Lighthouse 6. And again, I am scraping the bare minimum surface of this. In particular as well is the notion that we also got Lighthouse CI got an update to this as well. So if you're using Lighthouse CI, there are Docker images now straight in there that if you want to recipe these out and use 6 and get these new set of numbers in there as part of your new performance testing as part of things, which we did discuss in a previous episode as well, you can do that as well. So don't be afraid of go ahead and running that CI so that you always get this against all your latest commits and whatnot. So we've talked a little bit, we've talked a lot about the overall performance numbers. I'm trying to think if I've forgotten anything that isn't particularly important. First CPU idle is now gone. The reason first CPU idle is now gone is that it was not quite as different as TTI, just as an FYI. So it's really kind of combined into TBT. If you're wondering, hey, where did first CPU idle go? And you'll still get the summary report of thread work if you need to go into this and see where all your thread work is. Boop. So I just switched screens and I realized that I don't have the slide up. That is the 29-minute overview of really the performance-based metrics that have changed in Lighthouse 6. There's additional budgeting tools and whatnot, but we'll have to cover those in another episode so that we can set up all the fancy tooling and show all the magic that is behind new performance budgets, because we love performance budgets, don't we? And if I can find the other screen, I will do the outro target to this. It's somewhere. That is not the screen. Boop. So if you've thought, hey, Justin, all these numbers have changed on me, and we could really use some help understanding exactly how TTI variation has decreased the actual interactivity of my site, even though I didn't realize it, hey, don't worry, we've got corporate training. We'd love to help you, as we teach you the latest and greatest that is what the web platform offers in terms of web performance and the tooling that you can use. So we can do virtual trainings. So if you're interested in virtual trainings, do reach out to us, hi@thisdot.co, for all your complimentary assessment needs, of which you'll get to talk to me, and we can look at your performance, because performance, always a good thing to look at. Boop. And with that, I don't know what episode this was. I do not remember the episode number. I think this is episode number 6. This was episode number 6, I think, of Web Performance Virtual Training. 7. I'm getting the number 7. We've done 7 of these. Wow. We can just keep talking about web performance forever. We're going to do it. We're going to do it, people. And we're going to keep making the web faster. So this has been Justin Ribeiro talking about all things web performance, all things things. Tara, thanks for hosting me today. Such an appreciation towards you and all the fantastic work you do. And if you're out there in the middle of this pandemic, stay safe and be careful and keep testing your web stuff. Justin signing off.